Thank you very much. I really appreciate that extremely generous introduction. Um, I promise I will make that gigantic sales pitch worth it and true, because I have tested all of this with many, many teams and got a lot of positive feedback. These techniques are actually now used by a number of different companies as a primary methodology. So beyond me, there are multiple different organizations using this as their strategy for helping their clients, improving their processes internally, and and generally staying ahead of all of the complexity and change that we need to manage in software delivery and knowledge work. So with that, luckily I skipped my introduction slide because it's completely unnecessary at this point. I will just jump right into the content. So um, every organization, every team, and every individual has a number of improvement initiatives that just keeps growing, right? We have this continuous backlog of things that we know we need to do to level up, to get the job done, to satisfy clients, to um, advance our capabilities. And that results in this gigantic backlog that grows and grows, right? And how do we actually uh, tackle that? It means we have to go faster all the time, right? It's not going to slow down anytime soon, which means we have to go faster. And the question becomes, how do we do that? What is the method that we can use to tackle acceleration without sacrificing quality or value or burning out all of our staff? And how do we manage that when everything gets more and more complicated? So where we struggle currently is a couple of areas. So a lack of clarity has been highlighted by a number of different research efforts into digital transformation and change adoption efforts across many different industries, but primarily in knowledge work, lack of clarity is the killer. The silent killer too, because it's not something that is obvious, and it's not even obvious what it looks like, right? What does it mean to be unclear? What does it mean to be clear, even? And clarity is incredibly important because we need it for not only strategy to make sure that we understand where we're going, we need to share it with other people so that they can operate at top speed, because we can't be holding people's hands. We can't micromanage. We thrive when we let people run at top speed, knowing a clear destination. And so what we do, especially in this day and age where we have distributed teams and so much diverse talent that we need to be working together, the superpower here is mapping. And I've found a lot of success in doing this. I used to do this on whiteboards pre-pandemic. Now it's all online. I work with a number of distributed teams. I map everything from conversations to strategic offsites and everything in between. And the templates, the formulas, the models that I'm going to share with you are the ones that I'm showing here. I'm going to go into detail about what these are, how you build them, and what kind of impact they can have in your organization. So the reason why we need to do this is because across your organization, every single individual has a different perspective, right? We might be standing at the same street corner, but we're standing on opposite ends of it. And so we all have different perspectives that are informed by our individual experiences, our biases, the information that we have access to, who we know, where we grew up. All of these things shape a very unique perspective. And reconciling those perspectives, bringing them together across the team is very challenging, because often we don't realize that we have separate perspectives, right? We can easily fool ourselves into thinking that everyone's on the same page, and we're ready to work together towards the same goal. And this happens all the time when folks are reading documentation. They think they understand it one way, but it was intended with a completely different focus. Or everybody leaves a meeting thinking that they know what's going to happen next, that someone else is going to do the thing that everyone expects them to do. And this happens all the time. So we need these mechanisms that can help us bridge the gaps between all of our different perspectives and help us agree that we have a clear, cohesive understanding as a group, so that we can then break off and operate independently, but head in the same direction. So what I found when I was struggling with this as an individual contributor, as a team leader, as a CTO, as a consultant, was that there's very few models that people know about. There's different techniques for all of these things. There's a lot of different ways that you could tackle this challenge, but I didn't find a start to finish system that took me from we don't know where we are, where we're going, to we know exactly what to do next and what we're going to be doing 6 months from now. And we all agree on that. So that was a gap that I wanted to fill, selfishly for myself, but also for all the teams that I was working with, because there was a huge challenge every time I would work with a client, every time I would work with a team, to get over this gap of everybody being confused and not knowing where we're headed and what to do next. And another challenge with this is that you can't copy and paste any of these activities. If you try and copy Amazon, if you try and copy Spotify, if you try and copy company X, you will fail, because their context, their perspective, their business model, their strategy is different than yours. Their culture is different. You need something that generates solutions from your team for your team. And so you're going to need models that are flexible, with enough structure to guide you, but not fence you into somebody else's situation that doesn't match your own. So I've crafted these maps and these techniques to be just enough structure that you know what you're doing, and there's very clear direction to each of the workshops, but the outcome is unique every single time you run it. Even in the same team, you will get different outcomes. You will get a different result every time you run it, based on what is around you at the moment, what you're focused on, what your top priority is, and all the perspectives on your team at that time. So this, to me, really addressed the gap of getting everybody together and becoming laser focused on crystal clear outcomes that everybody can agree are valuable and that actually move the needle. And the other thing is that they're all based on data, right? Because it's very hard to get people aligned if there's not concrete, clearly understandable data. We don't want a bunch of opinions fighting forever, because it's very difficult to reconcile opinions, but data at least gives us something that we can agree on independently. So as I mentioned, mapping is this technique, this way of working, way of collaborating with folks that I think is completely underrated. And I would really like to see this become a more regular practice in teams that do knowledge work across organizations. It is one thing that can bridge the gap between the folks in your organization who do marketing and sales and HR and legal and engineering. Everybody can understand a Post-it note. Everybody can place a Post-it note on a whiteboard, and everybody can vote on a Post-it note. These are very primitive, simple techniques that combine their basic building blocks that give you very powerful results. So the other great thing about this is that while you're doing this, because this is interactive, because folks are collaboratively building out these maps in real time, you learn all of these techniques about getting from an outcome to a actionable game plan by doing it. And you start to understand things about flow, about lean, about business, about tech, about all these subjects that are so critical to knowledge work in 2021, just by going through the motions. You know, you sort of learn by doing, and you leave with a stronger understanding about what all of this means, because there's a lot of terminology here below the surface. There's a lot of tech that can get in the way. There's a lot of language that can confuse people, but this mapping simplifies it to a great degree. So it's a naturally engaging practice. So we're asking everybody to participate for feedback. They get to be a part of building this. And that means that they are sharing not only a common understanding, but they're sharing ownership over the result too, right? You get this benefit of the IKEA effect, where you build it so you feel better about owning the outcome. And that helps a lot when you're counting on people to execute on commitments, on operating autonomously and delivering results. Having a sense of ownership is extremely powerful. It also has a way of bringing folks together. So it can bring all those perspectives together and point them in the same direction. As I mentioned, this is not a copy and paste situation. There's models to follow, but the outcome is always unique, and it is always based on your environment and what you need to focus on at this moment. As I mentioned, learn by doing. This sticks. It also sticks because you can come back to these maps over and over again. They live forever. You can update them. You can take snapshots. You can share them easily across the organization. You can point to specific things and say, this is what stood out for me. And that helps all of this really sink in to a level that training doesn't sink in, to a level that reading a book doesn't. Going through this practice helps folks learn about things like flow and product development and strategy and business and tech alignment that you just can't get any other way. And last but not least, this is fully remote friendly. It works whether you have one person who's remote, nobody remote, everybody remote, and everything in between. It's easy to share. It's easy to participate. It's using free tools 99% of the time. There's a lot of custom built tools that you could use, but I've never paid a dime for any of this stuff. You can use any free tool for video conferencing or online collaboration, and there's lots. So what does that mean? Let me pause. I could take a question if there's any questions. I'm just going to take a sip of water, and I figure we might as well make good use of that time. Okay, moving on. So what I think is really powerful about this is not only is it something to bring teams together and help them collaborate, it's actually giving you positive business outcomes. This is all for a purpose. It's not just team building. We're using these techniques to actually solve challenging problems. So to give you an understanding of what that looks like from a high level, we start from a desired outcome. That could be, we want to go faster, we need to improve quality, we need to incorporate this new acquisition that we've brought into the company, we need to go attack a new market. Any outcome. If you want to get up earlier in the morning, you could set that as your target outcome. There is no limit to what you can set as a target for this. And it works for all kinds of, I've used it for all kinds of things like that. Then we look at the value stream, which is, what is the mechanism that's going to actually deliver that outcome? What's doing it today if we're looking to improve, or what do we need to build in order to get that outcome to happen? So a value stream, for anyone who's not familiar, is just a sequence of activities that it's like a process for delivering value. So we look at that because When we want to deliver a desired outcome, we usually don't want to do it once. In 2021 and beyond, what we want is sustainable value delivery, right? We want to be doing things continuously. We want to be delivering products to customers continuously. We want to make sure that nothing that we put out in the world is going to fall over in 2 weeks or accumulate a bunch of technical or process debt. So a value stream is a way of focusing on how do we actually get this thing done and how do we make sure that it's sustainable. It's going to highlight where our bottlenecks are, where are we slowing down, where are things challenging, where are we wasting time or energy. And that's going to help us look at what in the larger organization is affecting the performance of our value stream. So as we're working, how do our dependencies impact our performance? So that's looking outside of the value stream at things like other teams or legal compliance or regulation or manual work. And once we have an understanding of dependencies, we can take a look at capabilities that will address those dependencies. So if we want to break a dependency, if we have a dependency on an external team or somebody else's product or a library that we need to get rid of, we can assess our capabilities as a mechanism for breaking that dependency. So if I have a dependency on a DevOps team right now, or I have a dependency on marketing resource, I need to go ask someone for something. I need to send an email to someone to get something done. If I look at capabilities, I can start to understand, okay, could we automate that? Could we bring it into our team? Is there some other alternative? And that's really powerful for improving the flow of value that's going to lead to our target outcome. So first, starting from mapping outcomes, what we're going to be really looking at here is working backwards. We start with the target outcome. In this case, we need to go twice as fast, right? We have this growing backlog. We need to be able to accelerate to tackle all of that work. We also want to make sure that we don't let quality drop while we're trying to go faster. It's no good for us to go faster if we just end up breaking things or accumulating a bunch of technical debt or creating more bugs than features. So we can focus on one primary outcome and we can have a secondary outcome to make sure that we don't slide off the rails or we don't go too far from what good looks like. The second thing we look at is why. This is powerful because it can place the outcome in the context of our external customers, our internal customers, stakeholders, individual contributors, partners. We can start to look at that outcome from a number of different dimensions and help it really resonate with folks, because we want folks to feel like they own this outcome and they're invested in delivering it. That's going to power this. That's what lights a fire underneath this effort and gets it started with a lot of positive momentum. The next thing that we want to look at is obstacles. So what are the things that we're going to trip on as we start heading down the path towards our desired outcome? This is important because it helps folks surface things that they're worried about or things that we've failed in the past that we want to avoid this time around. Things that are clearly in our way or things that we just don't know about. Like we could surface major unknown factors that we need to understand better so that we can either avoid them or leverage them in our favor. And that brings us to investigations. How can we find out more about our obstacles so we can avoid them? How can we find out more about our target outcome so that we can head towards it most directly, right? If we understand more about the landscape, we can understand what is the best path to get to our destination. And then last, we want to understand what measures we can use to see progress. So Just like as we are navigating with Google Maps, the measurements inside of Google Maps are going to tell us whether we're going over the speed limit, when we're going to arrive at our destination, the difference between different possible paths that we could take, the cost of any tolls that we might incur along the way. All these measurements are valuable, and they all help us understand whether we're taking the best route towards the destination and whether we're going to reach it when we think we will, or whether we're going to be late and we need to accommodate something to really stay on track. So there's a great comment in the chat about how this evokes thought and discussion, and that is really powerful. There's a lot of discussion that goes on through this. It's very positive. In some cases, it's challenging discussion because there's a lot of conversations that this sparks that teams don't have on a regular basis. That's a very positive thing. This gives folks a forum to talk about things that are really, truly important. And it's constructive because we can talk about specifics, right? We give folks opportunities to talk about what's most important. What are the obstacles that we could face? By giving those conversations space and facilitating those conversations and steering them in positive directions and capturing the outputs in real time, it's really creating the most positive and constructive form of team collaboration that you wouldn't necessarily get from just a meeting or a brainstorming session without any structure. This really helps folks stay focused and follow the path that is building out this, actually breaking down this target outcome, but building out this path towards our target destination. So next, we come to the value stream. What we want through mapping a value stream is an understanding of what are we doing right now? What is the process currently? So that we can understand how we can improve. Remember, in this case, we want to go twice as fast. So we're going to be looking at velocity. We're going to look at how long does it take us to deliver value currently, and where can we accelerate? So what we do is we measure step timing. How long does it take to perform each of the activities in the value stream? Also, and this is where a lot of the value is, where are we waiting between activities? And that could be waiting because there's a handoff to another department, or we have to wait for a senior engineer to get a code review, or we need design assistance from a designer who's only on the team for 2 hours a week because they're a shared resource. There's all kinds of reasons why we could have delays, and sometimes they are the most painful and the easiest challenges to overcome as soon as we measure them and we can see them. But what happens is we don't take the time to measure, and we don't have constructive models like value stream maps that we use on a regular basis to diagnose these challenges and to see them. And we might feel like we understand where the biggest challenges are, where the hotspots are, but until we can measure them and show them to other people, we might have a really hard time actually getting buy-in, investment, time, space, permission to actually go and tackle those challenges. So a value stream map gives us some tangible asset that we can bring to folks and win them over, or have a constructive conversation about, is this really important? Should we really invest in tackling this constraint? So in this example, what we can see, if we look at all the measurement, we see a few highlights here, but there's a single hotspot where we can see an outstanding amount of time being spent on a single activity and the boundaries of that activity. And so this has given us a narrowed focus from everything that we could possibly look at to a single target that everyone can agree on because we have data to support it. But this goes a long way. And this also doesn't take a long time either. You can run an exercise like this in 2 to 3 hours, and you go from everybody having a different opinion on where we should focus to a single common goal and evidence to back it up, along with a short list of things that you think would make a difference. That's really powerful, and I've never seen it out of any other technique. So this is another example. This is a real life example. You're going to see a lot more detail here because you can layer on a lot of detail to a value stream map. This is another thing that's powerful about this model, is that it really can serve as kind of a foundation that you can build upon with as much detail as you like. You can add quality measurement here. You can add staff representation so you can see what roles are present at each stage. That can highlight things like we've got the whole team engaged in 4 meetings for 6 hours a week. No wonder nothing gets done and everyone is burnt out, and people show up to meetings and sit on their laptops the whole time. These sort of things become very visible when we map a value stream. And there's a number of different things that we can highlight here, but this really quickly calls attention to a few focal points that are very easy to communicate. And whether you join the company today or you're the CEO, you can look at this and instantly understand where the focal points are. And that means we can have really constructive conversations about, what does this mean? What should we do about it? So in this case, the value stream pointed us towards a single hotspot, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper to find out what we can do about that. So in this case, we highlighted the environment setup step. And it turns out that the reason why that takes so long and there's such a delay on either side is that the entire value stream depends on many different things, right? It's not a fully autonomous team. I'm sure none of us work on fully autonomous teams. They're very rare. So this entire value stream depends on many, many different things. We could map everything, but what we care about is the hotspot, right? So we can save a lot of time and analysis by just focusing on the dependencies that are directly connected to our bottleneck. So in this case, environment setup is actually handled by our infrastructure team, which means we now know what to do about this. We can bring them the map and we can have a constructive conversation about what can we do about this bottleneck. It's our biggest constraint. It's taking up 45% of our total lead time. Is there anything that you can do to help us out? So instead of looking at everything, we're looking at the most valuable dependency, the most critical dependency, and we've now crafted a strategy to go and tackle this bottleneck, or we have clear next steps. And our clear next steps bring us to Ludo, our director of infrastructure, who we probably should have included in our mapping session from the beginning, but we didn't really know where it would lead us. So now that it's led us to Ludo, we're going to have a conversation. Ludo is responsible for environment management. As you can see, this doesn't exactly instill him with a lot of ease and comfort and confidence, because environment management is incredibly complex in our organization. We like to do a lot of things ourselves. We used to have an engineer who built out a bunch of stuff and then left. There could be any number of reasons why environment management is horrifying. But as a result, Ludo is always swamped. He's always being interrupted because he needs to be involved in every change to the environment, everything environment related. And he's got a bunch of long-running projects of his own that he's constantly trying to juggle, right? So he doesn't really have an opportunity to do a good job at anything because he's pulled in all these different directions. There's multiple product teams with multiple environments. And so this situation is not a good time. So what he basically has to do is try and ignore every request that comes to his team, or else he would have no time to do anything, right? So this doesn't really lend itself to increased velocity, right? What's happening is we are trying to go faster as a business, which means we're trying to go faster in product development, and infrastructure can't go faster. And this infrastructure situation is not rare. It happens all over the place because we have lots of organizations with shared services managing infrastructure, and they deal with a number of different chronic problems that really impact their ability to deliver positive outcomes and really respond to customer demands, the customers inside the organization that depend on them, the product teams. So they're constantly fighting fires and grappling with all of these challenges. So what can we actually do about that? So if we dig into this environment setup and we look at what's actually involved in this, we can see that we have updating environments as a step in the process. We have creation or recreation of pods in our infrastructure. We have to stand up data, and then we have to test everything to make sure that the environments are properly set up. So what we're doing is we're using the same value stream mapping techniques to go and dig deeper into the problem and diagnose this problem with the infrastructure team. So what this is demonstrating is that we can map at any level. We can map at the very highest level of the organization, the very lowest granular activity in the organization, and anything in between. So whatever level you want to look at, you can map according to that scale, according to that zoom level, and you can connect all these things together. So you could say, if I want to dig into environment setup, what's involved in that? And you can explode that and break that out and look at all the steps in the activity there and find out what part of that is taking up the most space or time. So we can address all these constraints within this sub-process of infrastructure management. And my team of product development can go and help out the infrastructure team with some simple programming that we honestly do a little bit better than the infrastructure folks, because my engineers write pretty sophisticated code on a regular basis, and our infrastructure team is frankly not at the same level. So by jumping in and understanding where their constraints are, we were able to introduce some simple testing, some simple scripting that really helped us minimize the time spent on each of these individual activities, automate a few things that were happening manually. And as a result, we've now reduced the total lead time of our product development process by 35%. And that gets us 3/4 of the way to our outcome in a single day of investment. We've also built a stronger relationship with the infrastructure team as a result. We're now collaborating in a true sense and getting positive outcomes, not only for my product team, but every product team in the organization, because they all have environments set up as a part of their process. So you can start to see some of the return on investment that you can get from this easy, not time-consuming effort of mapping. You don't have to build anything to do this other than a few Post-it notes on a board. So that brings us to capabilities. How do we get to the next level and start to break some dependencies so that we can go even faster? Because ultimately, we don't want to have to depend on the infrastructure team at all in order to create and deliver value. We want to be able to run at top speed on our own. So what would that take? So capability mapping allows us to look at the key capabilities that are affecting our target bottleneck, right? So we're not looking at every capability that we could possibly list, because 99% of them don't matter. The ones that are slowing us down matter. The ones where we're weakest matter. And so by going through flow engineering, understanding where our constraints are, we can target all of our efforts at the constraints, which means instead of this taking months to collect all this data and analyze it and having people not care about it by the time they get it all done, we're only looking at the things that are going to move the needle the most, where we're going to see the highest ROI. So in this case, what we want to look at is automated testing, integration testing, manual testing, environment management, data management, whatever it is that we think is going to make the biggest difference in our constraint. And so we look at this from a few different angles. And this is a very similar technique to the rest of them. We're going to be looking at just the most important capabilities. We want to understand who currently owns them. And so in many organizations, nobody owns things, which is their first challenge. But in this case, at least we have owners for each of these capabilities. That's a great step in the right direction. The next thing we want to consider is who is supporting the owner? Who's the backup? Because we have one single threaded operation for the capability, there's a high likelihood that that person is overloaded, that they struggle to juggle all of the demands on their time. They can't go on vacation. They can't take a day off. They can't go for training. They're constantly on call. They have the same problem that Ludo has. And so we can highlight that and we can make sure that we support those individuals by adding a backup who can be trained with them, who can shadow them, who can support them. Then we want to look at what level are we at with that skill at the moment? Where are we? So that we can understand the difference between where we are and where we need to be. Part of that is what we have in terms of support. What is assisting us to deliver that skill, that capability? That can be documentation, APIs, services, products that we consume, any number of things, anything that makes it easier for us to execute on that capability. So we can drive a degree of visibility and understanding into those support resources. Then we want to look at how long does it take to train somebody to do this? What would it cost to train someone to do this? You know, are we looking at, if we want to add a backup for SAM to support test infrastructure, how long would it take to train someone so that we can understand whether we need to hire someone or we can train them or we can have a part-time individual assigned to this? These are things that we don't commonly consider, but they have major impacts on our ability to deliver a capability sustainably and scale that capability if we need to. Then we also look at comfort, because if the team's going to take on a new capability, if they're going to be doing something they weren't doing before, we want to make sure that they feel comfortable in doing that. And so this is a measure that takes the temperature of the team and helps them voice any concerns about adopting this capability, whether they think it's worth it to break a dependency for the sake of going faster, if they feel like it's going to actually make their jobs more complicated or risk their current velocity, then maybe it's not the right time. Maybe we don't have everything that it's going to take to support that effort. And all that gets factored into an overall score. So we start to see, okay, where the difference between where we want to be with a capability versus where we are. So what we're aiming for here, this is an example of a very common situation in organizations where we have a complicated subsystem that's owned by a separate group outside of a product team, and it's lacking a smooth connection and something that facilitates high velocity delivery. So in this case, we're supporting the evolution of this current layout, the current topology, with an enabling team that's going to help bridge the gap between Ludo's team and my product team and address the delays, the handoffs, the issues with how complex and complicated the infrastructure work is, and get us towards a situation where Ludo owns a platform team that allows my team to serve itself and spin up its own infrastructure, manage our own environments without bothering Ludo's team or even waiting for them to do anything. So we can start to move in a direction of self-service by highlighting that we currently can't manage the amount of work that the infrastructure team needs to accomplish. It's slowing us down. It's having this measurable impact on our ability to deliver value. And so we can very clearly understand what is this worth? Is this worth an investment in a platform? What does the platform need to deliver in terms of capabilities, right? We have all that clarity now that we've mapped, and we can point to those visual assets to help anybody understand, whether they're writing the checks or giving us permission to do the work or bringing in external consultants that are going to do it for us. We can make the case for any of those options by revealing the process that we took to make the decision, showing that we have data-driven approach to discovering this opportunity, and also providing a visual resource to anybody, whether it's the consultant coming in from outside, the leader who's just heard about this the other day and someone asked them to sign a check. All of these people can be brought in very easily by being given a visual, clear understanding of the problem and what we want to do to solve it. So how do we actually make any of this progress, right? We want to look at what is the infrastructure currently doing? What is the infrastructure team currently doing? Maybe there's low-hanging fruit that we can get rid of or simplify or automate. We can look at what kind of requests are being made of the infrastructure team and maybe group them, understand whether there's things that the teams could be doing themselves. Often what I find with teams is that you could just create a frequently asked questions document or a playbook and have teams help themselves with really simple information where people don't realize that they ask the same question over and over again, because it's hard to realize that all of this stuff is happening many times across many different teams, right? If I'm asking a question of the infrastructure team, I don't necessarily know that every team has asked them the same question and the information's available on some page somewhere and it just hasn't been brought to my attention. So we can do some of these simple approaches to remove the friction, remove the impact on the infrastructure team, and allow everybody to move faster. So we can measure what it takes to deliver any specific outcome, whether it's standing up infrastructure for another team or across all the product teams. We can start to measure the impact of all those things. We can find those easy things to tackle. We can understand more about what specific capabilities the infrastructure team is delivering that we might be able to deliver inside of each product team. We can improve flow to make things faster, easier, more enjoyable. And what we find when we map value streams is that doing just a current state value stream map, what does it look like right now for us to do our work? You can find 20% of the value stream that can be just discarded as waste. And this is because just by seeing what things look like, it's very clear where we could improve. And the reason why we can't do that without mapping is that this is complicated stuff, right? It's not easy to visualize your entire process in your head, tack on the measurements, also add the wait times, and then scan through all that to find out where the biggest bottleneck is and what the return on investment would be. But when you map it out, you can see it, everyone else on your team can see it, and in that moment, everybody can agree, okay, if we just all posted our daily status in Slack, whenever we get in the morning, we don't have to have that sync meeting that's an hour and a half long twice a week. These are the sort of things that just really quickly happen and save you a lot of time. And I've done this many, many times. It's always true. And everyone I talk to who does value stream mapping will tell you the same thing. 20% right away, gone. So the other part about this that makes it worthwhile is that not only is that 20% paying for the entire thing, this isn't costing a lot to begin with. You know, we're really looking at including a few stakeholders in the early stages. We want someone who can make decisions and sign off on things like costs and changes to our processes. We want representation from different roles so we can get a diverse perspective and understanding of how the work is happening right now. And that can be anything between 5 and 8 people, max 12 people. But the smaller we can keep it, the less it costs, the less disruptive it is. We're talking 2 to 3 hours for each of these mapping sessions. It's not a lot of time. And I guarantee every team that I've ever worked with is wasting 10 times that amount of time on a weekly basis. So this is very low cost in comparison to the status quo. So again, just as a recap, what this looks like is starting from a clearly defined outcome and working backwards, breaking down a target to understand how we're going to get there, looking at the value stream and understanding how is the work flowing at the moment and where is it constrained, and then looking at dependencies and how to break those dependencies in order to improve that flow. And the effect of this is that we clarify goals. We really commonly understand as a group where we're headed and how we plan to get there. We identify what's in between us and our target destination, what's impacting us currently. And then we look at how we can address those impacts and break them, avoid them, mitigate them, minimize the effects of those constraints. And as a result, we end up in a situation where infrastructure moves faster. So my product team can move faster and the organization can move faster as a whole. And what you see as an impact on the actual individual teams is that by taking this platform approach, you can really dramatically reduce the impact on those teams, the cognitive load, the toil, the manual work, the repetitive work, but you also get a much higher impact. So in organizations that switch to these scenarios where they create a platform that product teams can actually serve themselves through, you get ratios where like 5 people are supporting 50 product teams. And that ratio is impossible if you have any kind of manual interaction, any kind of direct interaction between the teams. You have to have self-service to reach that level of productivity, but you can get there. And flow engineering can help you sort of understand the path to getting to that result. As a product team, you start reducing the amount of waiting that you have to do on a regular basis. You deploy more often. That means you get faster feedback. It means your customers are more satisfied. It means that all of your individual contributors are able to onboard faster. They get more time to focus on their job. They spend more time in the flow because they don't have to wait as much to get results or outcomes or help from other teams. And so your overall lead time shrinks dramatically. That means your customers are getting value. That means your organization is getting value much faster, much more often. So just to recap, we needed to go faster. We looked at what we were doing and what was slowing us down. That led us to constraints in the form of dependencies in other teams. It led us to examine capabilities that we could leverage inside the team and build out in our dependent teams. And after that, what happens is we create this flow roadmap, which I'm going to explain now, that really lays out from a strategic level how we get from where we are to our target outcome in a form that people are really familiar with. Like roadmaps, we see them in product, we see them in tech. We don't see them in terms of workflow and productivity and velocity and quality. So that's what a flow roadmap is. It's the how that helps you deliver all of the what in your other roadmaps. So it's the how your product roadmap gets shipped. It's the how you actually accomplish anything in your technical roadmaps. And it can bridge the gap between the two of them. So coming out of flow engineering, what happens is we have a lot of ideas for experiments, for changes, for things that we want to do to address the constraints that we've identified. So what we can do is, instead of treating all of those as equal and starting from the top, we can plot those in terms of what are the most important ones that are easiest to accomplish. And that helps us prioritize and form up an understanding of what we can do today, 3 months from now, 6 months from now. And we look at this from a couple of different dimensions. We look at targets and deliverables as things that we want to do, things that we need to get done. We look at key metrics of success. So how are we going to measure progress towards those targets and deliverables? How are we going to know that we're on the right track? You'll recognize this again from outcome mapping. Measurement is how we understand that we're on the right track. But also we look at methods of success. What are we going to do to impact the metrics that are going to deliver the outcomes? So hopefully this paints a very clear picture for folks of how to get from a target outcome to a very clear strategic and tactical game plan that makes sense to the highest executive leadership in your organization and the person who just joined yesterday, and everybody in between. So if this is valuable to you, if you feel like you want more information about this, there is a free ebook that covers this in much greater detail from flow.visible.is. It's my website. All you have to do is sign up and you'll get it through email. As a result of signing up for the book, you'll also get the email course, which is the whole ebook broken down into 7 days worth of course content that gets delivered every day. You'll get a piece of it. So even if you are like me and you download an ebook and then never read it, this is going to get it to you every day in a bite-sized chunk that's very easy to get through. And it's easy to share with your team as well. I'm also writing a book with my co-author, Andrew Davis, on this subject of cross-organization collaboration, flow, and flow engineering. It's going to come out from IT Revolution, the folks behind the Phoenix Project and the DevOps Handbook. That is coming out later next year. But we have a newsletter in the meantime that's going to come out every 2 weeks. It's got insights from the book. It's got stories, cases, video from us, conversations, news, things that we find interesting. We're really aiming to deliver a lot of value between now and when the book comes out and beyond. So if you're interested in this as an area of study, and following along with my journey, learning more about this and trying to communicate as much as possible what I see in the industry and the results of this practice, please do sign up at that address, inside-out.work, and reach out to me on my website, visible.is. I'd love to hear from you and tell me about your challenges. Tell me why you think this wouldn't work for you. Tell me about your successes using similar practices, or whether you use something similar but different. I would love to hear all that. But that's all I have. Thanks very much.
Feel free to unmute or type your questions in the chat box if you have any. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, hi Steve. Can you hear me? This is Jiva here from Chennai.
Yeah, hey.
Hi, great session. And I have a question. I really like this value stream, but in real time, having customers, third parties, vendors, multiple teams, and we have a fixed ceremonies, right? Planning, retrospective, or certain ceremonies. And in the middle, uh, I mean, I feel like practically a lot of guts is required to bring in this initiative and bring in owners and all these, getting this implemented on the field. So what's your advice on how do we get this done on the field? You know, when everybody is rushing towards their own targets. I'm really, you got my question, right, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an interesting challenge because this is the same thing that we struggle with when we're sort of sawing away at a tree with a dull saw, and we don't want to take the time to actually sharpen the saw and get the job done in, a tenth of the time, right? The truth is we need to step away from the work and look at how the work is going in order to get the best results, right? We can't just grind away in the same direction forever and expect to improve. So unless there's a few options. I mean, if you already have an improvement mechanism, um, you could surface this as something different to try out, and you could start very small. I always advise folks to start with outcome mapping because it's very lightweight and you don't have to go through the entire process to really get a lot of value. So if there's hesitancy, if it's really daunting and challenging to think about, um, what is going to, how you can actually like tackle this challenge, I advise you start with outcome mapping because you can really just look at outcomes, obstacles, and investigations. I think is the bare minimum if you really want to get some positive results with your team. And then you can go further. If people found that value in that, you can take another step and look at, okay, well, what if we look at how that outcome is actually going to be delivered, and we look at our workflow and try and tackle some ways to go faster or some ways to improve quality. It really depends on the target outcome. But if you're in an organization that doesn't care about improvement, then it's very hard to get people to care about something like that. I would say try to attach some of these practices to things that you're already doing as a fresh approach to change things up as uh, a different practice. But if the attitude and the culture in the organization is just work and make it happen, then it's a tough sell. I don't know if you would have success with anything that you're trying to get implemented.
Great, Steve. Understood. And one last simple question. Which day of the week is better to have this session in your experience?
Oh,
Value stream.
I don't know that there's any best day of the week. I think whenever you have time, whenever you can make time, ideally you have folks who aren't burnt out, tired from a full day's work when you ask them to participate in something like this, because you want people to be energized. But it can work any day of the week. You could maybe tack it on to like outcome mapping. You could tack on to sprint planning, right? I mean, before you do sprint planning, you could do outcome mapping, because you could treat your sprint goal as a target outcome, right? And that could give you an opportunity to slide something like this in to the typical practice. And you could also pull this into a retrospective as well. So you could say, what are we trying to get to in terms of better results, a better outcome for next sprint. So tacking this onto a retro or using this practice to shape a retro could be very interesting as well. I've seen both of those work well.
Absolutely, I'm able to connect on the field. Yeah, thanks a lot, Steve. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Jillian did have a question, but you ended up answering your answer to your other answer ended up hitting her question too. So
Beautiful. I love when that happens.
oh, I know. Are there any other questions?
One other question that I often get from folks is, and it speaks to Jiva's question as well, is when is the right time to do this? And the answer is always. It's possible to do it too often, but it's never too early to start doing it. And I think that folks will often feel like they're not ready to look at any of this because they're not at a level of maturity or capability. They think it'll be too uncomfortable, or they don't have the right buy-in or people to participate. But you could do all these exercises with one other person and get value out of it. You can do all of this in very little time if you have very little people involved, and you can use that as a test to go and share with more people and then grow the effort. But there's no time like the present, because the truth is we're all wasting time. We all are struggling, trying to be more productive and create more value. And so we can do things like these mapping practices right now. And I suggest folks do them every 3 months, because what happens is when you're mapping the state of your organization today. And if you actually make any improvements, things will change and the landscape will change. So the map needs to be updated. This is a good thing, right? It means that you're actually making progress, but we need to map to understand the terrain. The terrain will change as a result of our actions. And this is a cycle that I encourage teams to repeat every 3 to 6 months, because if we're making progress, then our understanding of the environment needs to be updated to reflect that progress.
If I can just share my experience with in addressing that first question. I worked for an organization in the past, and they kind of came up with this like average dollar figure per team per day. It takes, let's just say $1,000 for this team to work 8 hours in a day, right? And they sort of projected or calculated, the waste in dollar amount. If it took 3 extra days or 1 extra week, it cost us X number of dollars. And that was a really fast way to socialize the justification to optimizing like process flows or some of the things that you're speaking about. So when people, especially like leadership, hear about how much it's costing them, it's a lot more impactful than like it's taking us like 2 extra weeks or 1 extra month. Like people are more sensitive to the dollar. So I'm not sure if teams or organizations outside of where I worked are able to do that, but I guess the point is like just do whatever it takes to make it very, I don't want to say dramatic, but very apparent, because an 8-hour day for a consultant or for anyone is going to cost a lot of money, and then multiply by the number of projects and number of teams, et cetera, and you're looking at like some big numbers there. So I guess being creative in how you socialize it is what I'm getting at.
That's awesome, Seth. That's exactly what I've done in the past as well. When I was trying to convince folks to do things like this before flow engineering was a thing, before I did any of the other maps, and just I was doing value stream mapping with spreadsheets, but the way that I tried to drive the sense of urgency to cause action or reaction was to basically say, well, what's a generous average cost? Let's say, sorry, not generous, conservative average cost of an engineer or, somebody in product or whatever. You can pull any of these stats off anywhere. It's very easy to get a reference. So you don't have to know everybody's salaries, but it's pretty easy to get numbers for how much it costs to run a team for a week. And if that team is constantly missing deadlines, if they're constantly pushing items from sprint to sprint because they're incomplete, if they run sprint review and it takes 4 hours, or their sprint planning takes 2 days, which I've seen a lot, you can start to make the case that, I think I have a hunch, let's say, that we could cut down sprint planning by 80%. You can use just that hypothesis to say that if I can spend 2 hours and highlight the fact that this is one of our biggest bottlenecks, what is that worth to the organization? And that can start to craft a pretty compelling pitch.
It's awesome. And then I have a question. Hopefully, I have some time. I work, within a team, but also within a department to help drive the agile evolution. And so, obviously, what you've shown here is it's clear that it's useful at the team level. But I guess my question is at a fleet or chapter level, or whatever you want to call it, department level, what's the scalability of this, and how, and should you start at the team level and then grow it out, or can you start higher up and then to view what your specific teams are doing and how they contribute to the bigger group?
That's a great question. So value stream mapping actually comes from mapping an entire organization, everything it takes to deliver the primary product or service that organization delivers. So, it comes from auto manufacturing originally, and a value stream map would be everything from raw materials like steel and rubber through suppliers that translate those things into things like tires and rims for cars, how they come into the factory, all the steps it takes to build a car, paint it, get it on the lot, get it delivered to a dealership, and then sold to a customer, which is pretty high level, pretty much the top of an organization like Ford or Toyota. And that's usually where it's used, is at the very highest levels of an organization. I kind of backed into value stream mapping by doing something similar, but I didn't really understand anything about value stream mapping when I was doing process mapping and measurement. And I was doing it at a very micro level. So I was looking at onboarding new customers into a company and mapping that process. And it worked extremely well for that. And then I learned about value stream mapping and high level value stream mapping. And I remembered that I actually learned about it in school, but then I forgot because it was so boring and didn't apply to software. I was wrong, but it does come from manufacturing. It does come from the real world. It comes from high level, organization level Zoom. But I found that you can just dig and dig and dig, and you can dig down as far as you want, and you can go to whatever level. So you can start at the team and then say, okay, well, how does this team who's delivering a feature factor into a release that's a combination of multiple teams' contributions, to how does this contribute to an overall product delivery strategy? How do we go from shaping an entire year's worth of possible product decisions all the way down to shipping something to customers? And then you can go all the way down into CI/CD pipeline and something that's almost completely automated and measure that. So it really works at the very highest macro, the very lowest micro. And I'm actually applying it now to networks of value streams. So value streams that interact with each other, because you have multiple product teams that consume the deliverables of other product teams. So teams that create components that get reused by other product teams, things like design systems that get used across multiple product teams, dependencies like infrastructure and platforms. I use this value stream paradigm, this model for everything in organizations at every level, and it never fails. It really helps folks understand the sequence of events that's happening, that's building and delivering value, and then how to measure that and understand it.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for the question.